Orphaned deer falls head over hooves for rescuer's 11-month-old daughter. After an open-air museum took in an orphaned fallow deer, the little thing fell head over hooves for the owner's 11-month-old daughter. The deer, named Ziggy, was rescued and taken in by Jeremy Goldsmith, who runs Mountfitchet Castle and Norman Castle and Museum. Goldsmith and the staff at Mountfitchet care for a variety of orphaned animals, and it took just a few hours for Ziggy to settle into her new environment. The fawn, believed to be a 2-month-old, was spotted on the side of a road near the castle in Essex after its mother was hit by a car. A passerby called Mountfitchet Castle, who thankfully took in the deer and gave it a warm shed to sleep in. After settling in, it wasn't long before Goldsmith found that the fawn had taken a peculiar liking to his daughter. Now, 3 times a day Jeremy goes to the barn to feed the fawn and takes young Isabella with him. The two spend hours together and Isabella loves to pet and kiss Ziggy. The castle already has a herd of 5 fallow deer, and the deer will spend the rest of its life well-fed and with company. "We can't release her back to the wild now, as she would be too tame and not at all scared of people," said Goldsmith. "We're an animal-loving family. I was brought up in an animal-loving family, and I did the same for my daughter. It's just so natural, they spend hours kissing and petting each other. There's no fear like you would expect there to be," he added. Scientists regrow retina cells to tackle leading cause of blindness using nanotechnology. Macular degeneration is the leading cause of blindness in developed countries, but regrowing the human cells lost to this condition was the feature of a new successful treatment that took advantage of advances in nanotechnology. Regrowing the cells of the human retina on a scaffold of synthetic, tissue-like material showed substantial improvements over previously used materials such as cellulose, and the scientists hope they can move on to testing their method in the already blind. Macular degeneration is increasing in prevalence in the developed world. It's the leading cause of blindness and is caused by the loss of cells in a key part of the eye called the retina. Humans have no ability to regrow retinal pigment cells, but scientists have determined how to do it in vitro using pluripotent stem cells. However, as the study authors describe, previous examples of this procedure saw scientists growing the cells on flat surfaces rather than one resembling the retinal membrane. This, they state, limits the effectiveness of transplanted cells. In a study at the UK's Nottingham Trent University, biomedical scientist Biola Egbowan and colleagues fabricated 3D scaffolds with polymer nanofibers and coated them with a steroid to reduce inflammation. The method by which the nanofibers were made was pretty darn cool. The team would squirt polyacrylonitrile and Jeffemin polymers in molten form through an electrical current in a technique known as electrospinning. The high voltage caused molecular changes in the polymers that saw them become solid again, resembling a scaffold of tiny fibers that attracted water yet maintained mechanical strength. After the scaffolding was made, it was treated with an anti-inflammatory steroid. This unique pairing of materials mixed with the electrospinning created a unique scaffold that kept the retinal pigment cells viable for 150 days outside of any potential human patient, all while showing the phenotype of biomarkers critical for maintaining retinal physiological characteristics. While this may indicate the potential of such cellularized scaffolds in regenerative medicine, it does not address the question of biocompatibility with human tissue, Egbowan and colleagues caution in their paper, urging more research to be conducted, specifically regarding the orientation of the cells and whether they can maintain good blood supply. For decades of data suggests Pacific coral reefs can acclimate to warming oceans and resist future bleaching. Data collected over the last 40 years at a remote coral reef within the territorial waters of Palau has shown that corals are more adaptable to warming oceans than previously thought. In fact, they've already adapted, potentially at a rate of 0.18 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, and the researchers say that established models for coral bleaching events should be updated to presume an enhanced capacity for these stunning underwater ecosystems to sustain themselves over the decades. The Newcastle University-led study focused on the Pacific island nation of Palau and drew on decades of field observations, as well as many possible future coral bleaching trajectories for Palauan reefs, each with a different simulated rate of thermal tolerance enhancement. They found that if coral thermal tolerance continues to rise throughout the 21st century at the most likely historic rate, significant reductions in bleaching impacts are possible. We quantified a natural increase in coral thermal tolerance over decadal timescales, which can be directly compared to the rate of ocean warming, said study lead author Liam Locks. The researchers say that high-frequency bleaching can be fully mitigated at some reefs under low to middle emissions scenarios where, for example, the Paris Agreement commitments are fulfilled. We know that coral reefs can increase their overall thermal tolerance over time by acclimatization, genetic adaptation, or shifts in community structure. However, we know very little about the rates at which this is occurring, said study co-author Dr. James Guest. This study uses data from a remote Pacific coral reef system and estimates the rate of increase in tolerance since the late 1980s. The results provide some hope that reefs can keep up with increasing temperatures, but only if strong action is taken on climate change. To survive amid climate change, the researchers say coral communities need to endure progressively more intense and frequent marine heat waves. The Newcastle team's findings reveal that the thermal tolerance of corals in Palau has likely increased at a rate of 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade since the late 1980s. The researchers say that the increase suggests that natural mechanisms, such as genetic adaptation, acclimatization of corals, or their symbiotic microalgae, could have contributed to the enhancement of coral thermal tolerance. Several early models on climate change, global warming, and ecological degradation have been shown to be incorrect over the years, including the effects of ruminant agriculture on greenhouse gas emissions and plastic pollution entering the ocean, which GNN recently reported could have been overestimated for years by a factor of 30. On corals, some scientists aren't waiting to see if they can adapt at their own pace. Researchers in Florida are breeding corals that are specifically identified as carrying genetic adaptations that make them less vulnerable to heat and acidic water.